Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And just a few quick things. If you're hearing a lot of background noise out there, that is because my window is completely open in the unending battle between me and my landlord. It has reached a new phase where basically the heat is blasting right now, and it is fairly warm here in New York at the moment. So if you hear any background noise, sorry about that, but not much I can do about it. But anyway, more importantly, today's show, I'm very excited about this, because, for a few reasons. One, my guest, is Doug Valentine, who I'm, very excited to have back on the show, but also the subject matter. We're going to be talking about, Martin Luther King and his brutal assassination. And for anyone who, was unaware, 49 years ago today, Martin Luther King was shot and killed while outside on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. In short order, James Earl Ray was blamed and arrested while in the United Kingdom, and he was blamed as the sole person responsible. He was extradited back to Tennessee at the behest of his lawyer. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Now, within a few days of this, James Earl Ray would later recant and say that he was merely a patsy, part of a much larger conspiracy. And we're going to be exploring that, in depth today. Of course, we're not going to be able to get to everything. This is a huge sort of event in time. It's a lot of different details. But, Doug Valentine, you are joining us today. So, first I want to say, thank you so much. How are you?
I'm okay. Thanks for having me on the show.
Excellent. And, Doug, why don't you give us a little bit of background? Because you were, actually involved somewhat in the later trial in the 90s. You were, as a researcher, I want to say. But why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about how you got involved in the MLK assassination?
Well, towards the end of the 1990s, starting in 1995, Bill Pepper had written a book about the assassination, and he had made some claims in the book based on his association with James Earl Ray, who he had been persuaded to speak with, and also another guy named Loyd Jowers, who was owned a little diner, which was in the same building that a rooming house that James Earl Ray allegedly shot King from, a window out the back of this rooming house. Anyway, Loyd Jowers had claimed that he was actually part of a conspiracy to kill King. And Bill Pepper had assembled some, based on his conversations with James Earl Ray, who had a story to tell, and Loyd Jowers, who filled in the blanks that Pepper constructed a plausibly believable scenario for what might have happened, but he wasn't able to prove it. And so around 1999, he arranged what was sort of a mock trial, in which an attorney named Lloyd Garrison agreed to represent Jowers and a judge actually agreed to hear the case. What you need is a venue. And they found a judge in Memphis who was willing to hear the case. And on behalf of the King family, led by son Dexter, they hired Pepper, who basically, I think, worked for free. And at this sort of mock trial, Pepper brought together all the evidence that he had so that it could be in a sort of half publicity stunt, half concerted effort to bring all these people together and have them all go on the record as presenting their evidence in the way that Pepper had organized it to present this scenario that he imagined was, and he believed was the true scenario of what had happened and the events and the people that were involved in leading up to and the assassination and the cover-up of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And when he did this, when he was putting together this trial, he called me up and he asked me to become an investigator for him because there were still threads that he wasn't able to tie together. And he felt that they were important threads. And he asked me to look into a couple of to try to tie up a couple of loose ends. And obviously, it was a very big and expansive and complicated case, so it's impossible to get into all the details about it. But I ended up testifying there, and I testified about what my investigation had revealed, as did a whole bunch of other people. And the jury of 12 people came to the conclusion that the federal government was involved in the conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King. And these people, 6 blacks, 6 whites, had no axe to grind. And they came to a unanimous decision. And the press, the media, denounced the thing as a fraud and said that, it was one guy, somebody at CBS likened it to professional wrestling, where the outcome is known in advance, and the victim, one guy is destined to win and the other guy is destined to lose, and in a sense that was true, but it had a much broader purpose, and because you can't rely in these cases like the Kennedy case or either John or Bobby. You can't rely on the government to be objective or to present all the evidence. And so, this was very much a way of bringing all these matters to the public attention. The book itself, Pepper's book and a million other books that have been written about it, were not as successful in grabbing the public attention. And of course the media did everything it could to denounce it and mock it and in the process smear any of the real and true evidence that was presented, So, and then afterwards, I continued in my association with Pepper. He hired me for about another year afterwards to tie up some more, of the loose ends, because there are still loose ends, and without any kind of government sanctioned and cover up assassination of a major public figure, there's always going to be loose ends. I mean, that's the nature of the thing, and there's nothing you can do about it. And ultimately, these things are 50% uncertain and 50% certain, and it's just an expression of the power that the government has over us, and not just in this instant, but in every instant that determines our lives. We're just, serfs, and the people in power are able to construct the narratives that define our lives, and through the use of their power to enrich a few people that pay them to do their dirty work, and then the rest of us just stumble along, half in the dark and half in the light. But for me personally, it enhanced my understanding of how the system works. And I don't, I was pretty independent. I never believed all the different things that Pepper was purporting to be true, and I just had a small part, and I just tried to stick to the facts and where what I could prove and not get too involved in either the spectacle of the trial or all the other theories that were presented. So although I know a little bit about all the different aspects of the case, and of course learned an awful lot about what happened to King, and I also had the benefit of, in my investigations, actually spending a lot of time in Memphis. I got to know members of the Invaders, who were the Black Power group in Memphis at the time. I got to know a lot of black people in the community down there, including a bunch of them who did not like Martin Luther King Jr. and had absolute, my whole understanding of what it meant, and what it means to be a black person in America was very much shaped by my investigation and my part in this investigation. And it changed forever how I feel about race in America. And what, the thing that I would stress above everything is that you can't get hung up too much on Martin Luther King to the extent that you lose the perspective of black people every day in America are suffering. And King was trying to give expression to that. But if you just focus on King, it's like, the old saying, and, don't look at the Buddha's finger when he's pointing the way. You gotta stay on the path. And although it's the King case now almost 50 years old is very, important. It's important primarily because it's a way to understand what it means to be a black person in America. And that's why that's what he's a symbol of. And his assassination, if you look at it and understand it truly, is symbolic of the assassination of all blacks in America every day, all the time. And if you can't see it that way, and if you get hung up on all the details, or this or that, or, arguing about this or that, you miss the big picture. So I'll really, if there was anything that I could say today, is to understand that the assassination of Martin Luther King is a metaphor for the assassination of black Americans every day in every way by the same system that killed him and puts us all into darkness. We may think we white people understand what it means to be a black American, and you don't. You just don't. And if there's a deep state in America, and believe me when I tell you there are many deep states in America, being a black person is an expression of, to be a black in Memphis in 1968 was to be part of a deep state. It was to be automatically associated with crime and all sorts of things which, were imposed upon these people in this community. And they were fighting for their freedom in their lives. And King happened to be out front and suffered a brunt of it. But by assassinating King, they were able to very much end the Black Power and Black Revolutionary movement in the United States. And that was the purpose of doing it. You can have a martyr, sure, that's fine. But if you kill off the head of an organization and you can throw that organization into discord, you've achieved your goal. So don't forget all that in the broad picture in talking about Martin Luther King.
Well, and I'll just echo that to the degree that the legacy of King has been so whitewashed by the media. He's been co-opted by everyone. We're only supposed to think of Martin Luther King in a very kind of basic cookie cutter sense, without any flaws, without any of his foibles, and without the more sort of radical ideas behind much of what he was saying, but particularly in the latter part of his life. It went beyond mere racism, and he was talking about poverty. He was talking about imperialism, militarism, the problems of materialism. And we live in such a materialistic society right now. And also just, again, what you were saying, in terms of the, like, you know, killing of a whole movement and you know, metaphor. I mean, it really kind of, hits home today when you look and see, and not all that much has really changed. I mean, there are, obviously, it is not 1968, thank God, in terms of race relations, but, very much, I mean, the sort of broader, bigger things, we're still dealing with all of that. And of course they erupt at moments here and there. But for the most part, I mean, the status quo has remained. Ultimately, the people that King was, you know, warning us about are still in power. They've not gone anywhere. And, you know, if anything, they're more powerful, because they've been able to present us with an illusion that things are better, that things have changed or progressed, and they really haven't. But, Doug, speaking, specifically about some of the aspects of the case, because I know listeners are going to be, you know, hungry, for a little bit of that. In sort of broad strokes, because again, we're just sort of, this I hope will be the first of several, shows that I do on Martin Luther King or on the assassination, but in broad strokes, what's at the sort of the heart of the conspiracy? We know that James Earl Ray is the lone gunman responsible for everything. But let's talk a little bit about Loyd. What did Loyd Jowers later tell the media and other people that would lead one to believe there was a much larger conspiracy?
Well, sure. And the story that the government accepts, the official story, is that all on his lonesome, just because he did not like Martin Luther King.
Right.
James Earl Ray stalked Martin Luther King across the country, and for a couple of weeks. I can't remember exactly how long a period of time this was. He financed this adventure on his own, even though he was a petty criminal and he didn't have a lot of extra money to spend on gas or ammunition or anything. He drove around the country. He was, you know, following news reports of what was going on, and knew that Martin Luther King was going to return to Memphis. Martin Luther King had been in Memphis for a sanitation workers strike, which had gone bad because it was, the police had penetrated the invaders and also put people into the sanitation workers, and they had provoked a demonstration and a little minor riot, which enabled the police to start busting heads and shooting people, and a young kid had gotten killed. 16-year-old kid got killed, shot dead. Nobody knew. I don't know that crime has been solved. I'm sorry, I don't know whether they ever actually fingered somebody for shooting this kid. But, you know, there was some looting and stuff like that. So, King felt it was incumbent that he return to to Memphis, and to, try and, quell the problems that were going on there through the force of his, you know, eloquent rhetoric and his presence. And so, apparently James Earl Ray knew that he was going to come, figured out that he was going to be staying at the Lorraine Motel. And, I have visited the scene, and, the Lorraine Motel is a little ways up a hill, and there's a street that runs, horizontally along the hill, okay, in front of the motel. And then as you go up the hill, at the top of the hill, there's this rooming house where James Earl Ray stayed, and where Loyd Jowers had his little greasy spoon diner. And next to a couple hundred feet down the street, on the corner, is a firehouse. And so anyway, circumstances presented James Earl Ray, or whoever was going to shoot King, with a perfect line of vision coming out of if one was in the window of the back window of this rooming house, had a perfectly clear view looking down the hill at the Lorraine Motel. And at 6 o'clock on the evening of April 4th, Martin Luther King stepped out onto the balcony, and James Earl Ray shot him once in the face, in the jaw, and killed him. And people on the scene, including an undercover agent for the FBI and the police, a guy named Marrell McCollough, and he was there on the scene. I believe he was the person that actually cradled Martin Luther King in his lap and put a towel to his face. And one or two other people are pictured in a very iconic photograph pointing at the Lorraine Motel in the area of the road, saying that they heard the report from the shot and they knew it had come from that direction. And that's pretty much established. There's no question, as in like the Kennedy assassination, did the shot come from the front or behind? This was pretty much everybody knew that the shot came from that direction of this rooming house. So then, according to the official scenario, James Earl Ray, I think he ditches the gun and he runs out and he jumps in his car and he drives away, and that's it. Now, there were extenuating circumstances. According to the government, Martin Luther King and his entourage asked the police to withdraw the security detail that had been signed to him. Wherever King went, there was always the local police would always provide security. In other words, a whole detail of guys would be sent out to cordon off, to be in the area, to be at crossroads, to observe if any suspicious vehicles were coming into the area. And supposedly, and I don't know whether it's true or not, the King entourage, which included Jesse Jackson and a few other notable people, and a couple of the invaders, including Marrell McCollough, who was, assigned to King's private security detail that day, which was provided by the invaders, that they had asked the cops to withdraw. So, of course, there were no witnesses. There was no cops around either to search anybody who might be escaping or to immediately appear on the scene to get witness statements. And as fate would have it, the police never thought it fit to question anybody in that neighborhood about anything unusual they saw that day. So over time, as the two different stories developed, and initially there's just the one story, the official story, the authorities were able to absolutely and totally define the narrative and write the script for what supposedly happened, because as always happens, there's no security detail and there's no witnesses. And then as time went on, they were able to besmirch everybody who was a potential witness because it was a black neighborhood, and a lot of these people were under the hammer of local police forces. If you were smoking a little pot, it was in those days, if you were to go out and testify against the police, you're dead. You're in jail. People, and again, the critical aspects of this case, which Pepper unfortunately overlooked, had to do with these conditions. And the conditions were that there were people there who saw what happened, and yet, without understanding the relationship between the blacks in that neighborhood and the police forces, you'll never understand how this thing could be pulled off. If you don't have that understanding, it all seems to you like either you have to believe one story or the other, which is why earlier I started off with this sort of, prologue about how this is all about race. And if you talk about, being a black person in Memphis in 1968, that's a subsection, a sort of deep state that you're not going to understand. Well, you have to also understand that organized crime and its relationship with the police is another deep state. And that unless you understand the relationship between criminals and law enforcement, you can't understand how the cops could pull this off. Plus which, there is also the factors of apart from local police, the FBI and the involvement of the military in this alternate factual scenario of what happens. I mean, you're not going to hear it on Fox News, although they deal exclusively in alternate facts. You're not going to hear the alternate facts about what happened in Memphis in April of 1968. But as your listeners probably well know, Martin Luther King had been the target of FBI compromise and compromise informations and really massive efforts to defame him and to destroy his image, because that it's the story that matters, not really what happens. And they were, he had been surveilled by the FBI for many, many years. And they were, they had this guy Marrell McCollough, who I was talking about, who was an undercover agent in the Memphis police department, was on the balcony. Well, he was working for the FBI at that moment as an FBI informant, and the FBI had informants in King's entourage. Some of the closest people to him were reporting to the FBI. They knew every movement that he was going to make. They knew where he was going to be. What his security detail was going to be. There was, informants and penetration agents all throughout the black community and King's entourage. So the FBI had what they would call current intelligence about everything he was going to do. At the same time that they were, trying to dissuade him from moving forward as the leader of the civil rights movement. They constantly tried to blackmail him. They were always threatening to reveal his extramarital affairs. There was, they wrote him a letter that William Sullivan, who was one of the, I think the head of counterintelligence in the FBI sent, which is like the third highest position in the FBI, actually wrote a letter himself telling King that, it was an anonymous letter telling him to kill himself. They wanted him dead. There's no question. The FBI, through its own statements and actions, clearly had an intent that it wanted King dead. And this letter urging him to commit suicide is proof of that. Plus all the racists in Memphis who totally controlled the police department. It was only in the late 1960s. The police apparatus in Memphis numbered about 850. For many years, there was not a black in it. And after the Civil Rights Act, Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Bill, 64 and 65, they had to start integrating the police department. If you weren't alive in the 50s and 60s in America, you don't understand. But they did. They started infiltrating, hiring blacks and putting them to the police department for the first time. But these guys were walking on eggshells. You have to understand. And, they were, weren't allowed to supervise white policemen. They just, really at the bottom of the barrel there. And there was one black policeman who was, in the firehouse on the day that King was killed, with a view from the firehouse. His name was Earl Reddit. So he had a view not only of the Ray Motel, but if he looked down the street to his left, he could also see this flop house from whence the fatal shot was fired. Well, an hour before King is assassinated, a guy named Philip Manuel, who was working for James Eastland, who was a senator, and he ran the Government Operations Committee. Very powerful senator. He'd been a segregationist all his life. Hated Martin Luther King. Well, this guy, Phil Manuel, who was down in Memphis that day, called up the Memphis Police Department and said there had been a death threat against this guy, Earl Ray, and he should be removed from the firehouse an hour before King was assassinated. So the one black guy in the police department who was in a position to see anything that was going to happen through this guy, Philip Manuel, who's working for James O. Eastland, who hates Martin Luther King as much, if not more than J. Edgar Hoover. They remove him. So the one remaining policeman who's in position to see anything that's going to go on is removed. Well, it turns out that Phil Manuel, through his entire career, had worked for the 902nd Military Intelligence Group, which was the most secret and potent military counterintelligence force in the United States. I had actually interviewed Phil Manuel for a book before I got down there to Memphis and found out that he was involved in all this. But after he left military intelligence and this military, not just any part of military intelligence, but the 902nd, he went right to work for the Senate, for Eastland. And the reason he did that is because he maintained all his top secret clearances. He could see things that Eastland couldn't see because he had the clearances. And so he somehow magically, this guy, Phil Manuel, ends up there and he withdraws. And to this day, the reason for him doing that remains sealed. There are government documents that explain why Phil Manuel was down there and why he gave this order and why the Senate, as opposed to the FBI, thought there was a death threat against this policeman. That information remains sealed. You know, like with Kennedy information, anything that's really important is sealed. You're never going to know about it. Well, that's because they have something to cover up. They're hiding something. Okay. And, so anyway, that happens. And then, it also turns out not only was the military involved through this guy, Phil Manuel, but there was also a regular back in 1968, the military had the legal right to spy on Americans. Okay. One of the things that you were talking about earlier there is an illusion that we've made progress. And in 1974, at the end of the Vietnam War, as a result of the Church Committee hearings and a whole bunch of other hearings that were going on and a general disapproval of the way the military was operating, military intelligence was what's the word? You know, they lost the right to spy on American citizens. But back in 1968, during the Vietnam War, they had the right to do it, and they were doing it all the time. And they had 6 separate military intelligence groups around the country. And the one that was in Atlanta was called the 111th. And I actually talked to some guys who were in it, including the guy who was in charge in Memphis that day, a guy named Lieutenant Colonel, what was his name? It's in some articles I wrote about it. Nice guy. And when I was down there doing my investigation for Pepper, I called him up. He was still living down south, and he said, yeah, they were down there during the assassination. Well, all of this tracks back to why Pepper hired me in the first place. Okay? Just keep everything I've said to you in mind, because I have to make a little side trip and explain how all this fits together. When I was doing my book, The Phoenix Program, which came out in 1990, I had talked to a sergeant who'd been in Vietnam and was part of the Phoenix Program when it started. And he came back to the United States in early 1968 after doing his tour, Play Coup, working with the Phoenix program. And he was assigned to one of these 6 military intelligence groups, and he was assigned to the one in Washington, D.C. Okay? And one of his jobs was looking for leaders of the peace movement, guys like, you probably don't even know these names, Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin and stuff like that. Your listeners may not even be familiar with them. If you were alive back and a teenager back in a young person back in 68, these were the guys who were, leading the anti-war movement for a lot of us. And they all had long hair and beards, and they were taking LSD, and they were trying to levitate the Pentagon. And, get a million people together outside the Pentagon trying to levitate it, and guys like Hoover and Eastland that couldn't stand it, because all the girls were walking around with off-block bras, and they were flashing their boobs, and, people were having sex on that, and it just drove them crazy, and they wanted to kill everybody. And, anyway, this guy, his name was Ed Murphy, and was telling me about his experiences, and he came back and he said, we were basically conducting the Phoenix program, the same thing we did in Vietnam back here in the United States, military intelligence. We were identifying the leaders of the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, whatever kind of, the women's movement, targeting them, surveilling them, following them, bugging them, tapping their phones, just like they did to Donald Trump. And when what are their jobs would be to go into a demonstration and start a bonfire. They would the military guys would work undercover. They would dress up like hippies. They would go into the midst of a demonstration, start a bonfire, start a fight so the cops could come in and bust heads because the police wanted to break up the demonstration. Same thing that happened in Memphis. Anyway, I was talking to him in my interview for the Phoenix program, and I had said, so the day that King was called up, all the enlisted men, and he was an enlisted man, started communicating with each other on their top secret, teleprompters or whatever they, what do they use, the things that, telephones, I don't know, they had some convenience communicating with each other, teleprompters. Anyway, they all started talking to each other. And one of the guys who was down there in the 111 said that a member of the 111 had been on top of the firehouse when the shots were fired, and that they had King under surveillance from the top of that firehouse, and they had actually recorded not only the assassination, but they had seen the people who were running away, and they actually had identified the people that had shot Martin Luther King because they were up on the top of this firehouse. I don't know. Wait, they didn't say they were on top of the firehouse, but they said they were somewhere. And everybody, the enlisted men knew this, and they talked about it. So I wrote it in my book. And in 1990, when the book came out, Pepper saw it, and so did a lot of other people. And so he knew that I had these insights into how military intelligence works, and that was one of the reasons he sent me to Memphis, was to find out what had happened. So I went to one of the things I did is I went to the guy who was in charge of the firehouse that day, Carthel Whedon, and I interviewed him. And he said, yes, indeed. On the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, he had let 2 plainclothes people who identified themselves as being part of military intelligence up to the roof of the firehouse. And as far as he knows, they were there all day. He never saw them come down. So, and that's one of the reasons, that testimony that I gave, and Carthel Whedon said the same thing, that the jury found that there was government involvement for all these reasons. Locally, the police, the FBI stating its intent to kill King, Eastland and sending this guy down. I mean, which we still don't know about. The reasons and how Eastland knew all this, what was going on. And, obviously some of the white cops were informing for the FBI and through other, what other channels were going on, so that even the Senate knows. And that's something you people listeners should understand. Just like private corporations the Senate has its own investigators who are out there floating around. You know, people like the head of the House committee that's investigating Trump and Russia right now. Nunes, is that his name?
Yeah, Nunes or something. Yeah.
And you know, I mean, they actually have staff that investigate for them. Okay, so you know, I mean, everybody's investigating everybody, and so they knew. So anyway, I talked to this guy Locke. That was his name, Jimmy Locke, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Locke, and he said, yeah, he had sent 2 guys over there. And I talked to one of them, actually interviewed one of them. His name was Green. And Green said he couldn't remember exactly what day he went. He thought it was the day before the assassination, you know, but Carthel Whedon said it was the day of the assassination, you know. And Green told me that he had come not just by himself, but the second person with him was a guy from the 112th Military Intelligence Group in San Antonio. Now, why the hell? The 112th in San Antonio wanted to surveil King is you know, also unknown. Another major important piece of evidence, or you know, certainly a line of investigation that should be followed has never been followed. But it's a feeling, and based on you know a lot of other things that there's simply not enough time to tell you about, that this guy was probably a CIA agent posing as a military intelligence agent from the 112th. And that's another thing that happens here in the country that your listeners may or may not be aware of. But a CIA officer can pretend to be an FBI agent. He can pretend to be working for the Senate Operations Committee. He can pretend to be a member of the United States Army. He can pretend to be a local cop. He can pretend to be a criminal. He can pretend to be James Earl Ray. You know, these people can pretend to be anybody. So unless you actually have, you know, positive identifications, you never really know. And so the very fact that the government covered up all these really important lines of investigation, they withdrew the security team. You know, they withdrew the guy from Reddit from the firehouse. They didn't investigate or talk to any witnesses on the scene ever. Carthel Whedon was never questioned by the police in his entire life. And here, you know, I mean, so they did not do their job for a particular reason.
Yeah.
And throughout if, you know, I mean, I've got very frustrated with Bill Pepper. You know, because he focused on some strange aspects. You know, my case would have taken 20 minutes to make. You know, just telling you just what I said now, bringing out the evidence and just keeping it very simple. But he got into Raoul and all sorts of other things that could not be proven and muddied the waters. And he also believed the guy that he had investigating, working for him, for close to 10 years, 8 years before he hired me, he was relying on a guy named Steve Tompkins. And Tompkins started working for him around 92. And Tompkins told him that there were special forces guys involved, and that one of them had pulled the trigger, or told him that he had pulled the trigger and been the assassin. And I remember Pepper called me up in 1992 and said, hi, Mr. Valentine, you know, I'm Bill Pepper. I read your book and it's very interesting to me. There are a couple of guys who work for Army, used to work for Special Forces, and they're in Mexico City, and they're willing to sell me for $50,000 the photographs they took of the King assassination. And I have a guy here, Steve Tompkins, who's willing to go down to Mexico with the money. What should I do? And I said, well, Mr. Pepper, you should definitely send that $50,000 down there to Mexico. And when you're done, there's a bridge I'd like to sell you in Brooklyn. I can give you a really good deal on that too. Anyway, this guy Tompkins ended up going to Nassau, I think it was, someplace in the Caribbean, and meeting with a guy who claimed to be the head of the 902nd Military Intelligence Group at the time of the assassination, and meeting with this guy 6 times. And on the first day of my investigation for Pepper, I determined that the guy had been dead since like 1980. And I told Pepper, and so this guy Tompkins had enjoyed like vacations, 6 vacations down in the Caribbean. And he told Pepper he was talking with these special forces guys who'd been involved in that. I mean, Pepper just really,
yeah.
I wanted to strangle him at times. So some of the things that he did. He's not a person who ever lived on the street. You know, he never lived for a year and a half on the street in San Francisco, you know, on welfare. He just didn't have any street smarts. And so a lot of people took advantage of him. And I think that to some extent, it's possible that James Earl Ray, being a street smart hustler, may have taken advantage of him in the same way. But there is plenty of evidence that, even if James Earl Ray was the trigger man, that he was part of a government conspiracy. And the conspiracy is pretty evident that the federal government hired a bunch of mobsters, actual mafia, member mafia guys who, again, I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but the mafia works nationally. They're just not in Detroit and New York City, but they're in Atlanta and St. Louis and they have been since 1900. And their organizations throughout the South are every bit as effective and seamless based on the mafia's relationship with local law enforcement as it is anyplace else. And when the federal government needs to knock somebody off, the easiest thing for them to do is to give the contract to the local mafia people, who then are protected by their partners in local law enforcement. To me, which is exactly what happened in the King case, and that national level mafia boss is probably somebody like Carlos Marcello, was actually underwriting all of James Earl Ray's movements around the country. And, if not, I mean, that's just speculation on my part, but there's also some evidence pointing to him, and that his sub-lieutenants in Memphis, knowing that King periodically popped in and out of town, had, an apparatus set up with the local law enforcement, and it probably involved Jowers, and Jowers providing cover for whoever really shot King, if it wasn't James Earl Ray, out of that rooming house, and then facilitated his escape. And that James Earl Ray obviously did it for a lot of money. Probably that what I heard was that the mafia paid him $50,000 to do it, which also explains why he got a false passport and was able to get out of the country, because somebody was helping him out. Although the government, again, in creating the narrative for the story, determined, like Lee Harvey Oswald, that he was a lone assassin who completely financed his operation and provided all the current intelligence that was required to pull off the job, and seamlessly escaped without any assistance. And if you believe that, there's a bridge and book, and I'd like to sell you too. So that's the story in the 45-minute version.
And hold on, I've got some, sorry about that, Doug. That's the obligatory, fire truck that comes by almost at the exact same time, 4:50 every, radio show. But, we're reaching, towards the end of the hour here, and I just wanted to, again, just really kind of hone in on what you were saying. There is some issues with William Pepper's narratives, and even in the actual civil trial in the 90s, there was some questionable stuff going on in terms of what the judge allowed, and of course that's been used against Pepper and people who question the King assassination, that, there was some... The judge was, whatever.
Yeah, the King family hired Pepper. And in there, and they said it was a King family show with Pepper as the ringmaster, okay? And they the King family really felt that this information had to get out. All this information, whether it was, good, bad, or indifferent, or, right or wrong, that the whole thing had to be out there. And when, the jury found Jowers guilty, Jowers had admitted to it. Jowers made no money from it. And the King family, in asking for, when the jury said, well, what do you want? And they said, we want $1. So they weren't into it to make money. And nobody who was involved in this, spectacle of a trial, which is what it was, although in a society of the spectacle, in Debord's society of the spectacle, the only way you can fight back against the spectacle is to stage your own spectacle. And the hippies that I was telling you about in the 60s understood this too. Abby Hoffman went into Wall Street one day, the stock exchange, and threw thousands of $100 bills. And all these wealthy stockbrokers and traders were like fighting each other for these dollar bills on the floor. And he made a statement. And he for a minute got to create his narrative and the alternate narrative for a minute. And that's what Pepper was trying to do. Whether was it flawed? Yeah. It was badly flawed in a lot of ways. And yet, if you really want to understand it, you have to look beyond all that. And don't get hung up in it. Take what's positive from it and what can be worked upon and work upon it. And don't go get hung up in the spectacle of it. And really, like I said, there's a lot of things, a lot of areas that in my notes that remain to be investigated, including how Phil Manuel knew that there was a threat against Reddit. Just lots of things. Who was this guy from the 112 that accompanied Jim Green to the roof of the firehouse? There's a lot of things that need to be uncovered. There's hundreds of them. But, the government was successful in creating a narrative and a counter narrative. And in the meantime, the truth remains obscure.
Oh, absolutely. And again, as you're saying, there is quite a lot of verifiable information there. As you said, there are bizarre government documents alluding to something going, the question is always, well, why is this sealed? Why can't we know why Eastland was doing this, that, or the other? There are legitimate government documents out there that do point towards there being some kind of conspiracy. At the very least, that they were fully aware that something was going on. And again, as you stated at the very beginning of this, a jury made up of 6 black and 6 white jurors were capable of coming to the conclusion that not only
the government was involved.
Yes. And that the government could commit a conspiracy to commit murder. And I think that's very important nowadays, to put that out there. There's always this sort of thought that we can't really stand up to the government. We can't hold them accountable. And in a small but very significant way, the case in the 90s proved that unequivocally, that you can do that average people have the mental capacity to say, yes, the government killed this man, and the government covered it up, and the government used all, the military and the FBI and local police and mobsters, and I think that's a very important lesson to take away from all of this.
Let me say.
Unfortunately, Doug, we're on the break right now. Okay, I'll see if maybe you want to stick around for a little bit later. But anyway, I will be coming right back to you guys after the short break.
I like very much.
Radio. You're an American institution. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me in American Freedom Radio. Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of micro plant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
Yo, what's up? Check this out.
The voice of the revolution. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media. Not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit, because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us with free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scum.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you're joining us right now, in the first hour, we were speaking with good friend Doug Valentine all about the MLK assassination. It is the 49th anniversary since Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by I hate using this word, but, a cabal of government agents, military, CIA, mobsters, local police, the FBI, and at least a handful of racists sprinkled in there as well. Well, very quickly before we're gonna be kind of exploring a bit more of the MLK assassination and the legacy of King and a few other things related to him. But I just wanted to say quickly that the brand new subscriber podcast is out. So if you have not already listened to it, if you are a subscriber on Patreon at the $5 level, you of course have access to the bonus podcast. It is a really good episode. Well, I'm really, really proud of the episode. It was a joint production between Tom Secker and myself. So it was for both of our subscribers, and we were speaking about the 1986 film Under Siege, not the Steven Seagal, Tommy Lee Jones one, although I do secretly love that film, but I didn't tell Tom that when we were recording, and he was making fun of it. This is a 1986 TV movie written in part by Bob Woodward, of all people. Very, very fascinating film. Eerily predicted the post 9/11 world, but also the world that we live in right now. Deals with Islamic terrorism, war with Iran, CIA black operations in the United States. Lots of stuff in that episode. It's a fairly long episode if I remember correctly, but really, really good. So definitely go and listen to that if you have not already. But April 4th is an important date, of course, being the day that Martin Luther King was murdered. And I think, Doug did a fantastic job of kind of, I think for anyone that is sort of in the dark about the assassination, and I would consider myself in that category. I don't know really all that much about the King assassination. I only actually started to learn about it in any sort of real kind of depth when I was reading John Potash's book, the FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders. There's a whole section about the King assassination, and he quotes a lot from William Pepper's books, but other books as well. And that's sort of what got me interested in it. But I think Doug did a really fantastic job kind of setting up the sort of basic structure, the basic parameters of the King assassination. And as I said, I think I'm going to try and do a few more episodes on this because it's one of those political assassinations. Just closing my door. One of these political assassinations that, for whatever reason, just doesn't get all that much attention in the alternative media. JFK is great and RFK to a degree, but I don't, the King and the Malcolm X assassination, like nothing. And they're very fascinating to explore and very important to explore. And so just a few little kind of bits and pieces that I think are really important, especially for people who are new to this, like myself included, that I think are great sort of little nuggets or threads to kind of look at. And again, it sort of illustrates or paints a much more detailed picture of what was really going on April 4th, 1968. As Doug was saying before, the mafia or down in Memphis, was involved on some level, and there might have also been the involvement of some other mobsters down in New Orleans as well. And this I'm really kind of just taking this from John Potash's book, which again references Pepper and a bunch of other books. But there's Sam Giancana, the mobster. His driver claimed to have witnessed the CIA and FBI offering $1 million contract on King to the various New York and Chicago mob bosses, and they refused, according to Giancana's driver, whose name is Myron Billett. Now, there's also this character, James Rico Kimball, who was a CIA mafia, CIA FBI asset in the mafia, who claimed that New Orleans boss Carlos Marcello accepted the CIA FBI contract. And I believe Doug mentioned Marcello earlier. And Kimball said that he actually flew out 2 of these snipers to Memphis. So this is another sort of aspect to the case. And again, I don't quote me or freak out if I'm getting any of this wrong. I really don't know all that much. I know that there are theories that there were, of course, multiple snipers in and around Memphis, military as well as police sharpshooters, Memphis sharpshooters, that were also stationed there. As far as we know, there's just the one shot that kills King, and James Earl Ray very well might have been the trigger man, as Doug was saying. He might not have been. He might have been sort of a patsy. I think to say that James Earl Ray was completely unaware of any of this and what was going on is bogus. He definitely knew what was going on. Now, maybe he was sort of built up to be the fall man, but as Doug was saying, he was paid well, most likely. He obviously had money to fly to Europe, fake passports. This wasn't like he sort of stumbled into this conspiracy and was just sort of an unwilling or unknowing patsy in this whole thing. But as I said, so there's this Marcello possibly involved as well. There's another, Loyd Jowers, again the owner of this boarding house and small diner, which I think was called Jim's Grill. He told ABC Primetime Live interview that mafia boss Frank Liberto paid him $100,000 for his role, and Jowers, claimed that this was allowing these various this hit team to use the boarding house to plan everything. He allegedly might have been handed the rifle from the killer, whether that was James Earl Ray or somebody else, and he hid it, and then later admitted that he had put it, I think, under the bar or the restaurant, like the bar top to the restaurant. And so, there's that aspect as well. And again, as Doug was saying, this points to CIA. That's a very common tactic of intelligence, is to contract out to their partners in the mafia. This, of course, gives them plausible deniability. Well, no, it was the mafia that killed King for whatever horrible reason. So it gives them a little bit of distance. These guys know what they're doing. Mobsters aren't all just sort of big goombas who are stupid and don't they're smart. These are especially you're talking about murderers, assassins, contract killers. These guys are smart. They know what to do. They know how to hide. So they're very good at their job as well. And again, as Doug was saying, there's the symbiotic relationship between police and the mafia is such that it allows for them to skirt the law. So the mafia side of this, I think, is very important to look into. But a few other things that I kind of wanted to bring up just because I found them really kind of amazing. Well, so I guess first we should say that this Raul or Raul character, this is the guy that James Earl Ray says was planning the whole operation. That Raul or Raul was he was sort of the everything. He was the money man. He was the operations man. And to date, no one has ever found a Raul or Raul. I know that there's a belief that he's some sort of mafia intelligence liaison. Very well might be the case. I don't know. And I know that William Pepper has claimed that he found, I believe he was like a gas station attendant or a mechanic in some auto body place up in somewhere upstate New York in some suburban area that fits the profile or fits the description of Raul, and that's him. I don't know about that. The Raul character does seem, it's never quite that simple. When you're talking about a government conspiracy like this, there's never usually like one guy that will just sort of put all the pieces together. And I doubt that if that were the case, that there was this one guy, I don't think that he would have been, he would have only known so much. You're not going to have the mastermind of this operation go down and speak directly to James Earl Ray. That's just kind of crazy. You delegate that out to somebody who really only knows, well, I'm just supposed to give Ray the money and the rifle and then I'm going to disappear. Or I'm just telling him to be at this particular place or that. But anyway, the Raul character, is I think it's tantalizing for people, this sort of mysterious ghost-like figure. But I would maybe caution away from that, because as Doug was saying, there is so much real documentable evidence that we can go to, we can look at, that really does. And again, it boggles my mind that people aren't more sort of willing to look into this, because it does represent a really great test case for, you can do this. You can actually have a regular jury that is capable of determining that the government was involved in a conspiracy to commit murder and to cover it up. And there is quite a lot out there that really does sort of point to that. So a few other little interesting things. Doug mentioned Marrell McCollough, who is this Memphis cop who was working undercover, who infiltrated King's organization, or I believe he was placed in the Invaders, which was this sort of Black Power group that Doug had mentioned a few times earlier. I believe that's where McCullough really was. He had sort of infiltrated that group and was, of course, relaying information to the Memphis PD and who knows, the FBI and others as well. And there is supposedly one of the army snipers who was involved in this assassination. I believe this is when we spoke with Pepper or somebody. There is this story that the snipers or the guys that were involved in the assassination, they were told that they would be able to denote fellow agents involved or LO assets, fellow travelers. They would be able to recognize them because they would not be wearing a tie. And again, this is it's a time when everybody wore a tie. So, I guess that was an easy enough way to sort of differentiate. And Marrell McCollough, who is the one who, after King is shot, he's the one that you can see kneeling over, and he's not wearing a tie. Now we're going on the basis that this is true, but he is not wearing a tie. He is kneeling over King, and there is speculation that this was because he was actually, checking to make sure he was dead. And there are other that's not a totally uncommon practice. There in political assassinations, a lot of times the first guy there to check the body is really there to make sure that he's actually dead. Now, interestingly enough, Marrell McCollough was not the only person in King's entourage not wearing a tie. The other person famously being Jesse Jackson. And again, I no idea. We're going on the assumption that this is true, and I believe that there's even when Jesse Jackson was he spoke about the King assassination and his sort of last moments around Martin Luther King and what was going on, and I believe he actually said that one of his sort of his memories that is sort of ingrained in his mind is King reprimanding him for not wearing a tie. So I don't know. Again, very tantalizing. God, is Jesse Jackson in on this? I mean, it wouldn't entirely surprise me given what we know about other alleged civil rights leaders like the Reverend Jesse Jackson being an FBI informant for decades and probably still is. And of course, there were, as Doug was saying, so many infiltrators, agent provocateurs, intelligence operatives that were inserted into King's entourage, into all sorts of the black movement, obviously the Black Panthers. I mean, there's a million, any radical group in the 60s or 70s, the FBI had agents all over them. So it is entirely possible that Jesse Jackson was, in fact, one of them. But even more interesting, I think, that aside with this Marrell McCollough. So not only is he an undercover cop who's the first one to run up to Martin Luther King, but he also worked for the CIA later in life. And this might sound kind of crazy and ridiculous, but this was actually confirmed by none other than CNN. So it's an older article. This was, I think it was back in 2008. And I believe it was near the anniversary, or I can't remember exactly. It'll be in the show notes, though. But it's sort of talking about the, King conspiracy theories, live on for 40 years or whatever. And, it's so horrible, it's so terrible. These, conspiracy theories. And they lay out a bunch of the, conspiracy theories that are out there, such as the man in the bushes who may have been, responsible, and then they give the facts of the case, what's really happening. And so they talk about a second gunman, they talk about this, but, military spies and in the photo, all that stuff. But then they talk about the, they lay it out, conspiracy theory, the CIA connection. And they talk about the infamous photo where everyone is pointing up in the direction of the, boarding house, and that there is, this man holding King's head in his lap. This was originally, and this is from CNN, so they're sort of admitting to this, that this, they admit that this guy was believed to have been a civil rights staff member for a long time, but in fact he was an undercover cop assigned to infiltrate a Black Power youth group, the Invaders, and he was there. The FBI hid the fact that this guy was an undercover cop, whatnot. And then they also present the fact that the CIA did hire McCollough. So again, really kind of bizarre little, every once in a while you find these things, and on CNN of all places, there's is so off topic, but there is a Anderson Cooper article on CNN years and years ago talking about various conspiracy theories in the JonBenet Ramsey case. And he gives them real credence, and he really is like, something is going on. But anyway, CNN apparently contacted the CIA, and the CIA said that McCollough did not join the agency until 1974, 6 years after the assassination, and it was a non-operational job, whatever the hell that means, that he's retired, he's no longer with the agency, and the Justice Department report in 2000 said that McCollough had passed a lie detector test, clearing him of involvement in King's death. So just to contextualize that, or kind of break it down, a undercover cop who's infiltrating King's entourage. He's the first person on to be at King's body. He's not wearing a tie. And several years later, he did go to work for the CIA in a non-operational job. So that's another, I think that's a tantalizing aspect of the case, but there is something there. At the very least, what a sort of strange bit of happenstance that this undercover cop goes on to work for the CIA, and that CNN of all places is confirming that. So that's a very sort of interesting fact, or one that really got my attention with all of this. And just one other quick thing. There's also Reverend Billy Kyles, who was also in the entourage. I believe he was outed at one point as a police informant, that he had sort of, given up information to the police, part of King's entourage. There's a very, very famous clip of him in a press conference where he's talking about the King assassination, where he has a Freudian slip or something, but he basically, it's a very bizarre sentence that he gives, which has led many people to believe that he was more than just a police informant, that he knew that this was going on. And he's talking about that day. He's talking about being out on the balcony. And for whatever reason, he says, quote, "Only as I moved away so he could have a clear shot, the shot rang out." Clear shot of what? Who is he referring to? And again, it's a strange admission that something was going on, guilt, or he wasn't careful, and but he says that he's describing, being out on the balcony, and he says, "Only as I moved away so he could have a clear shot, the shot rang out." Who was he referring to? What he wanted King to have a clear shot of? What? I have no idea. But that is, one of these other little things. And again, just that you've got these people all around King that were working for police or FBI and all of that. But anyway, I also wanted, the sort of conspiracy aspect of this aside. And there's a lot more to that. And as I said, I want to maybe do a little bit more research, maybe get some other interesting guests on to talk about this. But aside from it being the 49th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, it is also the 50th anniversary of the Beyond Vietnam speech. This is a very famous speech that King gave April 4th, 1967, here in New York, up at Riverside Church. And this is a very famous speech. I hope that the listeners are familiar with it. Link up in the show notes so that you can listen to the speech, and I encourage you to do so. It's about an hour long, and I would say it's probably, I think it's King's best speech in many ways. It's definitely his most controversial. It's his most complex speech. It doesn't have the it's not a feel-good sort of a speech, obviously I Have a Dream speech, or just many of his sort of general sort of civil rights speeches. They have a much more sort of upbeat message. And while Beyond Vietnam has a message of hope, it is a much more sort of realistic tone to it. And it presents a very kind of scary time in America. And this is very important to understanding why Martin Luther King was assassinated as well. Now, I don't think that the Beyond Vietnam speech is not I don't think was the reason. And this is when he's coming out opposed to the war in Vietnam, but more specifically opposed to American imperialism. He is opposed to the militarism which America was developing at that time on an unprecedented scale. That's what King is really coming out against. And he in this speech, he's linking that poverty, militarism, materialism, all of these are interconnected, and they result in us destroying other nations. That the destruction of Vietnam is having an effect here in America. That these are all interconnected. That poverty in America produces war abroad and at home. That's what's so important about the King's speech and why it was so controversial at the time. And you know, it is a marked sort of shift in Martin Luther King as a public figure, or as a national figure, as a uniting figure. And that is, I think, sort of gets a little bit more to the core of why Martin Luther King had to be assassinated. I mean, this is similar, not entirely, but, you know, when Malcolm X was assassinated, this is after his trip to Mecca, where he sort of denounces the kind of hardcore black nationalism or black separatism that he had been in favor of. This is, you know, when he goes to Mecca and he sees that there are Muslims that are white and black, brown, everything, you know, color in between, and he begins to become more of a uniting figure within the black population, but as a whole, he becomes much more, you know, it sounds so silly, but awake to what's going on. And you know, that's partly why they had to get rid of Malcolm X. But, you know, there are other reasons to a lot of that. But again, with King as well, he's now going beyond just, well, this is just about getting blacks the right to go to any school that they want, the right to go to any restaurant. You could almost see the government say, okay, fine, you know, we'll give them these things, we'll give them these sort of token little things, but he can't become a national or an international leader. He can't become someone that unites all black people plus white progressives, white liberal, white conservatives, whatever, you know, anyone opposed to war. We can't allow him to become that sort of a person. And the Beyond Vietnam speech, I think, in a lot of ways encapsulates King's political and social development into something beyond this is about, you know, righting the wrongs of a racist country. Now we see King getting into, well, we need to, you know, fix the issue of poverty. He addresses so much in the Beyond Vietnam speech. It's crazy. I mean, he talks about the French colonization of Vietnam. He talks about the Japanese occupation. Ho Chi Minh quoting the Declaration of Independence. He talks about chemical warfare in Vietnam, how horrible this is. King mentions things like clandestine operations in Guatemala, Peru, Venezuela. He makes fun of Nietzsche. And he also, he's also not like, he even criticizes communism, you know, and he says that he talks about the thrust for democracy, as the best way to defeat communism. And he says, quote, we must, with positive action seek to remove those conditions of poverty, insecurity, and injustice, which are the fertile soil in which the seed of communism grows and develops. Yet he's also said, you know, we don't need to fear communism. We don't need to fear them to the extent that we're willing to destroy other countries in some sort of vain attempt to stamp it out. He talks about drug addiction in this, you know, speech. He talks of, you know, the growing heroin problem. So there's so much in this speech, and I wanted to bring this up for a variety of reasons. One, because of course, if people are if you Google Martin Luther King today, you'll see all of these wonderful puff pieces by the mainstream and, you know, just the media in general, talking about how wonderful the Beyond Vietnam speech is, and, you know, this is where King became a true radical, and this is this sort of historic moment, and they're all, you know, they're now everyone can, oh, this is fantastic, you know, this is, you know, Vietnam was horrible, and we can all kind of agree on that, right? You know, that was the bad war. where we were totally wrong, and in retrospect now, of course. And everyone can kind of go, and that's part of, again, this sort of whitewashing of King. First off, this speech has been ignored for so many years. Everyone reads or listens to the I Have a Dream speech when you're in elementary school, but you never hear about this speech. I had no idea growing up that this was even a legacy of Dr. King. So, it's not really taught in schools. Now, of course, all the media outlets are going to talk about how, this is such a powerful speech, and they're using all this for their own political agendas. Now it's okay to talk about. But are you going to see these same people in the New York Times or the New Yorker or whatever opposing wars going on right now? No, not really. Only if it fits into their sort of political agenda. And again, they'll use the Beyond Vietnam speech as their sort of, you see, he was opposed to these horrible things. Guess what? He would have been opposed to what Barack Obama was doing overseas. He would have been opposed to Bill Clinton's war in Kosovo and all over the Balkans. He would have been opposed to all war. But part of this whitewash, it's all sort of framed in this, look at, that's so wonderful. He stood up against the evil Vietnam War. But they sort of miss the sort of, the specific. He could be talking about any war. That's what's so powerful about the speech at Riverside Church, is that it's beyond just Vietnam, as the speech is called. It is talking about a world view that we need. Society has been built up. Again, he constantly throughout this speech is talking about the poverty. It really kind of struck me listening. Yeah, I listened to it this morning. And what really struck me was the materialism. That materialism is part and parcel for racism, militarism, poverty, that all of these things, that when you have mass extreme materialism, this is something that King talks about a few times throughout this. I'll just read just another little quote, which is I liked a lot, just a sentence. He says, quote, "When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triples of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." Very powerful. And again, we live in such a materialistic society right now. Everyone's got to have a new iPhone. Everyone's got to wear designer clothes. Everybody is sort of obsessed with buying products. I mean, that's what, and again, that is is intrinsically linked to militarism. Because look at, what is TV really all about? Is about selling you items. It's, even when you're watching your favorite TV show or whatever, the news is all about selling you products. It's all about selling you. And again, you look at things, GE, owns NBC, and then you look at, GE is also this sort of military contractor and is involved in all these things, and that's what it is. They're selling you crap that you never really need in order to further their own militaristic agendas overseas. Really kind of powerful, because I don't see people necessarily kind of putting that link together, or really kind of exploring that as an idea. I think that sort of escaped the discussion when we talk about war and militarism and imperialism overseas. The aspect that this is also really, it's all about selling you a product. It's about selling you the war, and it's about selling you, the byproducts of that war. And in the meantime, you should buy a new car. You should also get a Visa MasterCard. You should probably get a new cell phone service. You should definitely get Dove soap and every other fucking thing that you don't really need. really kind of powerful stuff. And all of that is, you're not going to see that when you click on, the mainstream media article today talking about how wonderful the Beyond Vietnam speech is. You're not, and it's never like, again, this illusion that things have progressed and that things have changed. You'll never see people talking about King's Beyond Vietnam speech in today's context. That we are still, that the extreme poverty, extreme materialism, extreme racism has all led to more increased militarism abroad and at home. This is what King was talking about. That's missing. It's really all about, he was so brave to stand up and say no to Vietnam. I guess where I was sort of going with all of this is that this speech was extremely important, and there's a reason that Martin Luther King was killed 1 year to the date that he made that speech. And this is, again, something that is, I think, overlooked in this discussion. Right now, you're seeing all these, and I want to be, I guess I should be kind of fair. I mean, there are definitely, articles out there talking about Martin Luther King's death today. But, so much of the sort of storyline today is, this wonderful speech. It's the 50th anniversary of the speech. Now, I assume, on the 50th anniversary of his assassination, there will be tons of things. But people are missing that speech was so important and was so powerful and posed such a threat to the government, to the people that run this country, to the militarists out there, that King had to be assassinated on the same exact day. That is an oft-used tactic of the CIA and the deep state. It is the anniversary assassination. It's a common tactic and style. It sends such a powerful message to these people, to everybody, to the people involved, to the people in the know, to the general mass public. It means something. And again, we should also be viewing King's speech in that context. That he makes a speech and then a year later he is murdered on the anniversary of that speech. Very, very powerful. I mean, that's, again, anybody that wants to doubt what's the magnitude of the impact that Beyond Vietnam had, look no further than that. The anniversary assassinations throughout history, it's a big thing. Huey P. Newton was killed 1 year after he refused to leave prison in protest until Geronimo Pratt was freed. And he did leave prison, but, year after doing that, he's murdered. Laurent Kabila was killed on June 16th, 2001, 40 years to the date that Patrice Lumumba was murdered by the CIA in a coup and plunging Congo into a horror that few should ever have to suffer. So that very, very powerful. And again, not to get too off track, but at that point, Laurent Kabila had sort of, gotten fed up with the people that were really kind of controlling him, CIA, military intelligence, those sorts, and had begun to exert a little bit of independence. So they killed him. The same day that they killed Patrice Lumumba, and then of course Joseph Kabila, who's a complete U.S. proxy puppet. His son, allegedly his son. He may not be. He might actually be Rwandan. He comes into power. So it sends a very powerful message. Believe that everybody in Congo knew exactly what was going on when Laurent Kabila was murdered 40 years after Patrice Lumumba and his son came into power. That is a message that this is the real kind of game that's being played. This is what's really going on. You need to kind of take a step back, understand that we are in power. We are in control. we are dictating who lives and who dies and what the agenda is going to be for your country. So again, when Doug was saying that the murder of King in many ways was a metaphor or a representation of the murder of Black Americans, it was also a way of murdering those who advocated peace, those who advocated an anti-war stance, and more importantly, those who advocated setting things straight, of not being reliant on or not being stuck in poverty, not being stuck in a materialistic society, in a militaristic society. All of those sorts of factors were in there. And so that very, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I'm expecting from the mass media there. I doubt that they're really going to kind of, touch on any of that sort of stuff. But, I wish that was part of the conversation, because it is very important in understanding what really transpired and the magnitude and the impact of all of that. So, don't let that kind of slip you by today. Take the time, listen to the Beyond Vietnam speech, or read it too. I mean, I'll link up to their website. They have a full speech, both in audio, and you can read it as well. But, really kind of dig into that speech, because there's so much going on, and it's not angry speech, but there's a real seriousness to it. And again, a very realistic approach, that doesn't look all that great. And, again, this illusion that we've progressed. You read King's speech today, and I mean, you could use that. It fits our world to a T. Nothing really has changed all that much. The status quo is the same. And again, that's why it was so important to assassinate King in general, and in particular on the day that he had given probably the most important speech of his life. And I know that might seem very rude, or I'm kind of overlooking the importance of his civil rights speeches, and I Have a Dream, and all of those sorts of things. And I'm not really, because again, the Beyond Vietnam speech talks about all of those things as well. But it's in a much larger sense that this is not just about America and America's racist past. This is about a worldview. This is about us as humanity, that we must oppose these things. That we can't allow ourselves to slip into this sort of cycle of violence, of addiction, poverty. The need to fill the void with useless crap all the time. That's what's going on here. So I think that's why this is such an important speech in a moment. And again, just to kind of rant a little bit, about, King and the whitewashing. There's a lot of people out there, they're like, oh, well, he wasn't really all that hardcore, because, nonviolence and turn the other cheek, and that's not to say that there are criticisms of that. For sure there are. Perhaps Malcolm X or, the Black Panthers, that sort of ilk, perhaps that is the better way to go about this. But don't sell King short as, the sort of like the acceptable radical. If he wasn't really such a threat, if he wasn't so radical, they wouldn't have blown his brains out on April 4th. That should mean one thing. But again, too, there's this desire to paint King as, again, it's only a man concerned with racism and with helping to uplift his fellow black people, black Americans. That is true. But if you get past that, you can see that King was about much more than that. Again, when he's killed down in Memphis, he was planning this huge. He was planning basically like Occupy Wall Street. Before that was ever a thing, they were going to occupy D.C. They were going to set up a tent city, until poverty was fixed in America. Huge political, and God forbid that happen. God forbid people ask for help or to ask that they not be oppressed economically. And I know that's a taboo subject for some people. Who sounds like a commie or a socialist. Well, I'm not either of those, but that doesn't mean that we all have to suffer under the burden and of mass poverty and unemployment and all those sorts of things that a rich elite at the top should not have not only control wealth but be the arbiters of who will become wealthy. And ultimately, those are the people in charge of, making the bombs and deciding where the bombs are going to be dropped. So those aspects of King are always kind of whitewashed. He's got to be this sort of rosy image, this nice, respectable black man. That's sort of become the image, and the radical aspects of his life are sort of brushed aside, like his anti-war stance, his views on militarism and imperialism and how they manifest overseas and manifest at home. All of that is kind of denied. I mean, there was a big controversy. This was a few years back, or maybe more like 10 years back, I think. There was a play that was going on. I think it was on Broadway, or it might have been off Broadway, and it was about Martin Luther King. I believe it was sort of his earlier life. Maybe it was like before the March on Selma or something to that effect. And there was this big controversy because in the play, the actor playing King smoked, and Martin Luther King smoked like a chimney, and now he hid it well. I think you can find some pictures of him smoking, but he hid it because it was sort of frowned upon within the church, for a man of God to be smoking, I guess, and he also didn't want to influence kids, he thought it was bad. But he liked to smoke cigarettes, and that is again this sort of aspect of him that that it's like taboo to even suggest that. That there was this sort of uproar in this play for accurately depicting him. That's the thing too. They don't want an accurate depiction of the man. Did King sleep around? Yes. But what is it? Does that mean that he was horrible? I mean, he wasn't abusing these people. He wasn't, killing them or hurting them. And to be a little conspiratorial, who knows, where some of these women plants, where, is he put into compromising positions? I know there are allegations that there is some sort of, FBI, sex tape that they made of King, and I don't know too much about that, so I'm not really going to speak to that, but it wouldn't surprise me. But, that doesn't, those sorts of parts of his life, I think should be not embraced. Obviously, we don't want to embrace, being a, philanderer or something, or cheating on your wife, but, they should be talked about because it helps to, I think, I think it makes him stronger. It makes him a person. It makes him real and tangible. And Martin Luther King has become this sort of, I think he would have hated it, this godlike figure, deified in the way that he is. I don't think he would have really, wanted that for himself. I mean, especially as a man of God, I don't think that he would want to be, deified in the way in which he is, and sort of, looked at as this saint without any sort of, again, he talks about, in Beyond Vietnam that, that this is sort of this has been weighing on his conscience, that he, in his attempt to, better himself, he has decided that he has to talk about what's going on in Vietnam, that he has to talk about war and peace and the end to militarism, and that he's breaking his own silence that has been sort of weighing on him. And, so he was certainly a person capable of all those sorts of things, of having massive flaws in his own life, but still striving to make other people's lives better. And, so that's just, keep all that in mind, because it's so easy to kind of turn Martin Luther King into this, rosy, deified saint, that could do no wrong, that wasn't really all that radical, and it was just a damn shame that, some racist loner, maybe with a few other people, decided to shoot him down. Because that's not reality. That's not the truth of this. And it sort of just like reminds me of, again, I keep, as much as I try to do a show about something else, I always kind of come back to these themes and things that are going on in real life right now. But, it's this constant battle between like what's real, what's fake. This is a fake news. This is not. I mean, it's like with King smoking. I mean, it's like, no, that's fake. We have to have this fake image of him, because I don't know, that's somehow better for us. That's somehow going to make us, feel better. It's going to make him look better, which is ultimately really what it's doing is it's detracting from him. It feeds into this sort of like cookie cutter image of who he was and what he represented. And it doesn't get to the sort of more radical aspects of all of that. Now, that's not to say that, I don't know, there aren't flaws in what some of the things that he was doing, or, that maybe it wasn't the best approach, that perhaps, listen, turn the other cheek, there's only so much you're going to turn that cheek. At some point you're going to get really, you're going to be done turning that cheek, and you're going to want to, punch somebody in their cheek. And don't forget that Martin Luther King understood that, and to a degree, I believe, not accepted it, but tolerated it. He understood, why black communities rioted. He understood why, black militant groups were popping up. That made sense. He at one point, he had a permit to have a gun, cause he was, he's afraid for his family. And there's people around him, carried guns, they knew that it was a possibility they might have to use it. But that doesn't mean, where was I going with it? Oh, right. I was saying, getting lost here. But he understood why a more militant form of black protest was so popular. And again, who knows where he would have gone had he lived. I don't think that he would have told us to, gather arms and overthrow the government, but we don't know. I mean, that he was struck down at this moment in time where he was transforming into a much more radical individual, and an individual, someone that was going well beyond the sort of established sort of talking points for the civil rights movement. This was past civil rights. This was about, rights for all people. This was about the rights of the Vietnamese, of the Guatemalans, of everybody that, he talks about in this speech. So, maybe I'll kind of leave it there. I know I'm rambling on, and thankfully here is the music. So, thank you all so much for joining me, this week. Next week, I should have on Brian Heiss. We're going to be talking about O.J. Simpson and all of the various bizarre news stories popping up about O.J., as well as some of Brian's recent videos. But until then, I will be talking to you very soon.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.